Dear students, today in this topic we will be seeing about facial space infections. I think previous lecture we have already got discussed this odontogenic infections, but in this we will have space infections. Okay, okay. So these are all the learning outcomes. Okay. Apart from the learning outcomes, let us come to our daily practice. While other cases that you can see as an outpatient treatment in your routine practice uh, or during your service, um, this group of facial space infection will require you to admit the patient in hospital. So you will carry out the other treatments as outpatient procedures. It is, for example, root canal treatment or complete denture or crown preparation or whatever. Patient comes in, just gets the treatment done by you, and then goes away. But here, in this case of space infections, you will be admitting the patient. If you are, especially if you are owning a private practice, you will be admitting the patient to your hospital. You will be requesting for an admission because many of these patients might require um, admission, and then we have to start on IV antibiotics and analgesics. And remember, those patients who are capable of developing these space infections are immunocompromised. Some defect in the host defense, because the infection, which has otherwise could have run an innocuous course, has flared up, and then it has given rise to space infection. So these things, you have to keep it in mind, which demands that you have to have a clear understanding of the hospital admission procedures and the routine tests that you have to order, or the routine tests that will be taken during admission, and your ability to communicate with your medical colleagues, okay, or the admitting doctor, your ability to communicate with them. And then of course you may have to go for a rounds. You will have to go for your to go to the hospital to see your patient, isn't it? So daily, morning and evening, you may have to go for the rounds, and then you see to that the patient is fine. Okay, so these things you have to keep it in mind. So the space infection, regarding the practice point of view, the only difference between your routine cases and space infection is that, remember, these patients might require admission in the theater, I mean in the hospital. Okay, so other than that, um, there are many things that you have to keep it in mind. The most important thing after the admission part is that your ability to predict the risk for airway obstruction, your ability to predict the risk for any threat to the life of the patient. Yes, because as it has been said that a spark neglected would burn the house. A spark neglected would burn the house. Somewhere, somehow, an incipient caries or a caries that has progressed to a stage of irreversible pulpitis have been ignored, and then it has given up to this extent. So it has come to this extent of space infection. So remember, unlike many other your routine treatments, space infection can be fatal. It can kill the patient. So we have to be very careful, and we have to give due importance to everything that can predispose to to threaten the life of the patient. The most important thing is airway obstruction, rather than the septicemia or the breach of the pus contents that has been collected to eroding to the adjacent structures. Rather than that, before these things could happen, airway obstruction can happen. We will see one by one how all these things can happen, and for that you should be knowing about the anatomic limitations, the pathway of spread, from where to where this infection can go, and all these things you have to keep in mind, and then you have to plan your treatment accordingly. Okay, so with all this pre-context, let us go into the lecture. A bit of anatomy. So the space is nothing but it is not an empty space, as you can imagine. It is not an empty space. It is just an area of loose areolar connective tissue. It's a loose connective tissue which can contain an infection in case. They are actually meant for a smooth sliding of the structures over one another when the neck flexes or when doing various functions of deglutition, many functions carried by the maxillofacial region. So that involves many muscles. So for the smooth coordination or smooth functioning of these muscles and visceral organs, there each and every group of organ or muscle is being laminated with a special type of tissues. These spaces are nothing but the gap between these laminated tissues. They don't actually exist as gaps, but once these infections are able to uh, get contained in these spaces, uh, they show as space infection. That is why they call it a space infection. As such, other than that, there is no space actually existing. They are called as potential spaces. Okay, this is an attempt of the body to contain infection to a particular area. So during your irreversible pulpitis, the body tried to contain it within the periapical area. It could not contain it, then it will try to let out the infected contents through the skin. So that's how your sinus tract forms, isn't it? So in that case, in any case, the host defense mechanism is very low, or the virulence of the organism, that infecting organism, is very high. The cytotoxins produced by these organisms are more virulent or more toxic, then this adverse consequence happen, and then they are able to penetrate into the subsequent spaces. So the body tries to contain the infection still to these spaces. Again, this is a protective mechanism, but once it goes beyond a particular point of time, then you have the other adverse consequences happening. So this is the cervical fascia and the cervical fascia and superficial cervical fascia, which can be divided into superficial cervical fascia and deep cervical fascia. They are composed of fibrous connective tissues that encloses the organ, muscle, nerves, vessels, and they separate the neck into series of planes and potential spaces. So this division of separation between into series of planes is to coordinate the function of these organs without actually having any friction over one another. Okay, so the deep cervical fascia is yet another laminate thing, which can be divided into superficial, middle, and deep layer. So from anterior to posterior, for the first is the superficial layer, the next is intermediate layer is the middle layer, and then the deep is the most posterior layer, which is imagine just which is just in front of the your vertebral column. So it can be again subdivided into prevertebral and alar fascia. Whereas in the middle layer, you have this tissues covering the muscle. They are called as muscular division, and then those facial layers covering the organs, they are called as visceral division. Okay, so this is just to have a picture in mind. So as I have told you, these spaces are actually a loose area of connective tissue, which can form a padding between and around the various structures in the head and neck, and being more dense where they are immediately arranged about organs, because these organs need extra protection, so they will be thick around the organs. So you have the anatomical spaces and potential spaces. That's to for conveniently we have dividing anatomical and potential spaces. These anatomical spaces contain various structures like your muscles, masticator space, and then whereas potential spaces, they are identified only when they are involved with the pathology. That I have told. No, it's like a ballooning effect. Just only after only you blow air into the balloon, you inflate the balloon will become bigger. Before that, you will not know where the balloon is, isn't it? Like that, only when there is an pus collection, the space will appear swollen. Otherwise, the space is it seems to be virtually non-existent. Okay, so for an example, retropharyngeal space. These are all just an example. Okay, that is behind the throat region. So the classification anatomically, they have classified in relation to the hyoid bone. Those structures, those spaces above the hyoid bone, those spaces below the hyoid bone. So we have a variety of 8 different types of spaces, starting from the lateral pharyngeal space, submandibular, parotid, masticator, peritonsillar, temporal, submental, and sublingual. These are all the spaces above the hyoid bone. Just imagine where the hyoid bone is, and then you should be able to picturize it. And then the spaces limited to the hyoid bone will be the anterior, involving the entire length of the neck will be the retropharyngeal space, danger space, prevertebral space, visceral vascular space, or the carotid sheath space. So remember, what as a dentist from your point of view, what you have to remember is that when these infection is going into these regions, so that is involving especially the spaces involving the entire length of the neck, then the prognosis is going to be poor. So you have to stop before the infection reaches these areas, which means that you have to be very careful enough. You have to be more predictory, and then you have to intervene much earlier to save the life of the patient. We cannot take chances in these conditions. Okay, so to do that, what we have to do, that's the we will learn it during the entire course of this lecture. Okay, fine. So other than the classification that we have discussed before, as a dentist from practical point of view, you have to know these devices. You have to know these spaces. So primary space, secondary space. Primary space are those spaces in which the first your infection will go and contain. They may be canine space, infratemporal, buccal space. These are all the spaces where from the root tip there is an infection where this infection will go and contain directly from the root tip, directly from the area of focus of infection, where this spaces, where this infection will go and get contained. They are called as primary spaces. Secondary spaces are those which receive infection from these primary spaces. So they are not directly involved in this as at the onset, but they will get involved in due course. So, for example, the primary spaces may be canine, buccal, and infratemporal in case of maxilla, and submental, buccal, submandibular, sublingual spaces in case of mandible. And then for the secondary facial spaces, which again get secondarily infected following the infection of these spaces, will be the mesenteric, pterygomandibular, superficial, and deep temporal, lateral pharyngeal, retropharyngeal, prevertebral. All these things will be there. So this is an important classification which we will be asking you in any of the exams. So maybe 2 marks or 5 marks or whatever it is. So this is some as a dentist, from your point of view, you have to understand the difference between the primary space and secondary space. Okay, we will expect you to know. Okay, fine. And there are numbered spaces of Grodinsky and Holyoke. They have spaced it, I mean, they have numbered it as space 1, space 2, space 3, and space 4. It again contains subdivisions, which from superficial fascia to the space 2 involving the cervical strap muscles, and the space 3 involving the visceral divisions. That is the middle layer, which contains the pretracheal, retropharyngeal, and pharyngeal spaces, which the space 3A is very important in regarding they protect the carotid artery. Okay, the carotid sheath contains its carotid artery, internal jugular vein, and vagus nerve, which are all very important. The vagus nerve carries the parasympathetic supply for the heart, and then this carotid artery they supply this one brain. So all these things they are all very protected inside the sheath. And then the numbered spaces continues with the space 4 and space 5, the space 4 being the danger space, which can extend from the base of the skull to the mediastinum, and then the prevertebral space, which is between the posterior to the transverse process of the vertebra and the enclosed by the prevertebral fascia. These are all the various layers of spaces as you move from anterior to posterior. Okay, the danger space is space so called because once the infection sets in this space, it can very easily reach the mediastinum. It can reach the chest. So adding to the complications. So we attempt in every way that our infection, odontogenic infection, doesn't go this way long. Okay, but pictorial representation of various spaces that has been described here. You have the all the spaces of Gordinsky and Holyoke have been described here. You can read it later by looking closely at the uh, pictures from anterior to posterior. What are all the spaces may be? That is the gap between the different layers of the deep cervical fascia. These spaces above the hyoid bone, you have this anatomical boundaries with the lateral pharyngeal space, which is the shape of the inverted cone, and then anteriorly it is bound by the buccinator, superior constrictor, stylohyoid, and posterior belly of digastric, and then posteriorly it is bound by the carotid sheath and retropharyngeal space. We have superiorly the skull base and inferiorly the hyoid bone, and medially you have the constrictor muscles, and laterally you have the medial pterygoid. Submandibular space with anatomical boundaries. This better should be read with the picture. and then you should be able to just draw a sketch of how the spaces would be. Not exactly the muscles, nerves, and other things, but you should be able to roughly, I mean, approximately at least outline the spaces, how it will be when they are asking you in the exams. Okay. Submandibular space, you have this anterior belly of digastric, and posteriorly you have the posterior belly of digastric with the stylohyoid and stylopharyngeus muscle. It is just below the mandible, and then you have the inferior border of mandible. So superiorly it is having the border of mandible, and then inferiorly you have digastric tendon, and superficially it's related to platysma muscle and investing fascia, and deeply it is related to, I mean, mylohyoid, hypoglossus, superior crus. You have various anatomical boundaries. And the pathway of spread of submandibular space infection from the mandibular molar. Remember one thing that I think that they would have discussed you during the previous lecture on odontogenic infection. The level of muscular attachment determines where the infection should go. If the root apex is well above the muscle attachment, the infection will confine to the vestibular space. You can understand. Try to picturize it. So when the infection from root apex goes above the level of muscle attachment, vestibular space abscess will be there. Okay, the abscess will contain, the infection will contain in the vestibule, either labial or lingual vestibule. Whereas the root tip is extending below the level of muscular attachment, then it goes to the spaces. So it, see how it reaches the submandibular space. So it penetrates the muscle, and then it is reaching the submandibular muscle. And there is a sublingual space in which it's directly below the tongue. So it's bound anteriorly by the lingual surface of the mandible, posteriorly by the submandibular space, and superiorly the oral mucosa, that is just the floor of the mouth, and inferiorly by the mylohyoid muscle and muscles of the tongue, medially by the muscles of the tongue, and laterally by the lingual surface of the mandible again. It is just beneath the tongue, below the floor of the submandibular space is still farther anterior, and you have this anterior relation as inferior border of mandible. Posteriorly you have the hyoid bone, and superiorly mylohyoid muscle. You have investing fascia inferiorly, and then investing fascia superficially, and then the lateral, I mean, the lateral boundaries are formed by the anterior bellies of the digastric. So the canine space, you have all these muscles, labia superioris, and then orbicularis oris. Superficially, you have this labia superioris. So you have to, what you have to know is that this levator anguli oris, okay, then this mm, labia superioris, they have a these two muscles have a gap in between. Okay, so infection from these areas can reach as high as the medial part of the near the medial canthus of the eye. We will see. I think we have a picture. We will see about it in the canine space infection. Yeah. So the gap between those two muscles can actually uh, make the infections go high up as near the medial canthus of the eye. So when the patient comes to you with absolutely no extraoral swelling, but having only a swelling near the eye, don't get misjudged that it may be from the nasal cavity or from the eye or something. So it may be a canine or infection starting from a canine or lateral incisor as well. Okay, fine. And the buccal space infection, this is a very common thing. I think you would have seen one or two cases to come into our clinic as well. So this is a buccal space infection in which the cheek is like blowing like a balloon. So that's a very common infection, because most of the mandibular first molars, maxillary first molars will give rise to buccal space infection. So the boundaries may being anteriorly bounded by the corner of the mouth, and posteriorly the masseter muscle, and superiorly maxilla and infraorbital space, and inferiorly the mandible, and superficially by the skin and subcutaneous tissue, and deeply by the buccinator muscle. This is just lateral to the buccinator muscle. Again, here the level of the attachment of buccinator muscle determines where the infection should go. Okay, so when it is going above the level of buccinator muscle attachment, so the entire infection that is shaded in the dark color will contain in the. This is how it appears. See, look at the picture in the photograph. So this is how it appears in the patient. So this is a buccal space infection. Okay, see, yeah. Again, another picture of how high, how big the buccal infection can go. So just note in these pictures, like inferior border of mandible is diffuse in these regions. Inferior border of mandible is very diffuse. You are not able to palpate the inferior border of mandible. So that in case such patients come to your clinic, uh, I think you can predict which tooth is affected. That is mandible or maxilla. In case this is from a maxilla, your inferior border of mandible will still be, you will be able to see. But when it is from the lower, then the bond, I mean the inferior border gets obscured. And the pterygomandibular space, you have this is actually the space where you know this very well because you have been infiltrate, I mean you have been giving your nerve blocks in this region only. So anteriorly it is with the buccal space, posteriorly you have the parotid gland, and superiorly you have lateral pterygoid muscle, and then inferiorly you have the inferior border of mandible, medial pterygoid muscle, and ascending ramus of the mandible medially and laterally respectively. So the submacetic space is rarely involved. The peculiar thing about submacetic space is that when this space is getting involved, you will not see any extraoral swelling because of the thick attachment of masseter muscle. But the patient will be having an extremely high level of trismus, and then the patient will never be able to open the mouth at all. But you will not be able to see any swelling because this entire space is being tightly attached by the muscle, masseter muscle. So you anteriorly you have the buccal space, posteriorly again parotid gland. Just imagine the lateral border of the ramus of the mandible, then you will be able to understand. Superiorly by the zygomatic arch, and inferiorly by the inferior border of mandible, and medially by ascending ramus of the mandible, and laterally by the. This is how this masseter muscle, uh, uh, masseter space appears. See, as such, in the region of masseter muscle, you are not able to appreciate any swelling, but there is some swelling in the along the inferior border of mandible and the upper part of the neck only. Okay, so in that way, in cases of initial infection, you will not be able to note much swelling in the masseter and the infratemporal. This is very important. And the infratemporal space, you have this the boundary being laterally by the ramus of the mandible and temporalis muscle, and medially by the pterygoid plates and pterygoid muscles, and superiorly by the infratemporal space of the zygomatic arch, and inferiorly by the lateral pterygoid muscle. All these things are there. So you have the temporal space with the superficial compartment and deep compartment, and which is bounded by uh, the two fascias, the temporalis fascia with the lateral surface of temporalis muscle and medial surface of temporalis muscle and temporal bone. That is like shelves, like bunker bed. So one bed above, one bed below, like that. Two spaces which are overlapping each other, and the spaces involving the entire length of the neck that we have seen already. You have this retropharyngeal space with its anatomical boundaries being the pharyngeal constrictor muscles, alar fascia, and skull base. See, the superior border is always the skull base, and then inferiorly you have the upper mediastinum. So anywhere the infection can rise till the chest. Okay, so most importantly, they have this carotid sheath and lateral pharyngeal space in as a lateral relationship, and then these spaces, when they are able to around the carotid sheath and then they poke into the carotid artery, the effects are devastating. This is the danger space which communicates with the mediastinum, and you have this anterior border of retropharyngeal space. Posteriorly, you have the prevertebral space, and superiorly the base of the skull, and inferiorly you see the diaphragm in the posterior mediastinum. So this is why it is called danger space. And then laterally, it is formed by the fusion of alar and prevertebral fascia, which comes from the transverse process of the cervical and thoracic vertebrae. And the prevertebral space is the space just behind posterior. You have anteriorly the danger space, but posteriorly the vertebra. You have superiorly base of the skull and inferiorly the coccyx. And laterally you have the fused division of deep cervical fascia. And then visceral vascular space is that another space which has a protective layer within the carotid sheath. I told you the importance of the carotid sheath. Yeah, these are all the various spaces that you can see from the superficial, middle, and deep layers that when going from anterior to posterior. So the pathways of spread of periapical abscess into the vestibular soft tissue, I have told you already, the extent of the root and the attachment of the muscle is going to be there, and this is how the infection gets contained in the vestibular space. So when it goes to this level, then the management is very simple. All that you have to do is that just take a BP blade and then incise this area and drain out the pus. Okay. One more important thing which I want to tell in this context is that never give an enzyme to reduce the swelling in these patients. So patients coming with space infection to us, they want to get rid of the infection first. They don't want to get rid of the swelling. Swelling is not a matter to them. But there have been practices which we have observed in our experience that general practitioners prescribing enzymes like your papain extract or this hyaluronidase enzymes to dissipate the swelling. That is a very dangerous thing because the body is already trying to localize the infection. Once you prescribe an enzyme to reduce the swelling, you are actually recirculating the entire infected material throughout the entire process, throughout the entire body. Actually, these enzymes act by redistributing the fluid through the entire, and redistributing the inflammatory fluid through the entire body. So, in case of inflammatory swelling, reducing the swelling is of primary importance. But in case of infectious swelling, do not attempt to reduce the swelling. The pity part is that when the swelling is reduced, patient will think that the infection has subsided. He doesn't know about the pathology. So the patient thinks that the infection is subsided, and but actually we are doing more harm. Okay, so never attempt to reduce the swelling in a patient with space infection. It is contraindicated. Do not do that. By doing that, we are doing more harm to the patient than good. Okay, so let the swelling subside after the infection subsides. Okay, that should be the line of our management. The deep spaces associated with mandibular odontogenic infections are the other spaces. The secondary spaces may be uh, sublingual, submandibular, submental space, and they are the primary spaces. And then you have the masticator space like submesenteric, pterygomandibular, and superficial and deep temporal space. Spaces associated with mandibular infection should be parotid space, lateral pharyngeal, retropharyngeal, pretracheal, visceral, danger space, carotid sheath, and mediastinum. See, from the most uh, from the most probable space, they go to the most remotest area, like involving the carotid sheath and mediastinum. Why this is being told to you is that to do understand that the risk of spread of odontogenic infection to the other area. Then the spaces associated with maxilla are palatal, infraorbital, periorbital, and orbital space. Okay, it can reach till the eye, and never underestimate the virulence of the organism. To it may give rise to the cavernous sinus thrombosis also, though it is very rare nowadays. But this ascending infection have the potential to reach the base of the skull, and then they can infect the brain also. Lower, they can infect the lungs, they can go till the area of mediastinum, and then higher they go, they can infect the brain as well. So let us not take these space infections lightly. This is an example of an orbital abscess which is has an odontogenic cause. See, look at the extent of pus that is being collected in the supraorbital area. The pus getting drained out through the canthus. Look at that. And then the area of spread in infraorbital space infection. So I have already shown you the big spaces between the muscles the infections can arise, and then it can infect the area, the superficial areas. And then the area of spread of palatal abscess. Uh, the abscess in the palate is quite rare because of the adherence of the mucosa, but it does happen when there is an extreme dilaceration of the root towards the palate, hard palate. Then you do have this palatal abscess, and then you have to incise this area. Never strip off the palatal mucosa. Okay, try to incise and then drain out the pus. Do not try to strip the palatal mucosa from its underlying bone. It will cause chronic non-healing ulcers. It will take a very longer time to heal. Okay, fine. And then the most important point is Ludwig's angina. You have this bilateral descending cellulitis of the neck involving all these areas of submandibular, sublingual, and submental spaces, which results in airway obstruction. So this is something which we have to understand. So this is where you should know about to exercise due caution in admitting the patient and preventing the airway obstruction and preserving the life of the patient. This is actually an emergency, and this is characterized by a firm, acute, diffuse toxic cellulitis of the spaces that I have told you, and then the etiology may be, primary dental infection, post-extraction phenomena, and other than the odontogenic causes, you have the submandibular siluritis, compound fractures of the mandible, oral soft tissue ulcerations, puncture wound, secondary infections from the other oral. So the clinical features being there is an infection of the spaces and then with the brawny edema. So what happens here is that because of all these spaces are getting inflamed and infected, the tongue elevates from its position, and then there is edema in the glottis. All this leads to upper airway obstruction, and then there is paucity of pus, and then the it can lead to septicemia. But more often than septicemia, the patient will die because of airway obstruction. Okay, when the patient comes to you with this kind of swelling, and then the patient is not able to communicate with you. So this kind of communication will be there. This kind of sound will be there. When the patient tries to breathe out and breathe in, you will be able to clear that. Okay, so this kind of sounds, you should be able to understand that patient is having difficulty in breathing, and then you should take immediate steps. So management is normally you have to maintain the airway, and then you have to do the incision and drainage to drain out the entire pus. Of course, supportive with aggressive antibiotic therapy, and the patient will be devoid of nutrition. So you have to admit the patient and then give the IV fluids, hydrate the patient adequately, and all those things should go hand in hand. This is a case of Ludwig's angina with bilateral involvement of all these spaces, and see how the patient is actually not opening the mouth. This is the tongue which is pressing against the roof of the hot palate, and then the patient is unable to breathe. They will use all these extra accessory muscles to breathe. Okay, so you can see very well. So this is how where the space is getting large, the submandibular space. This is just a pictorial representation of how the tongue is raised and then it is pressed against the roof of the hard palate. This is how it appears, the neck appears in the Ludwig's angina patient. So you have to intubate the patient because the patient is not able to breathe adequately. So you have to intubate the patient for an airway, to do multiple incisions along the from angle to angle. You have multiple incisions, and then you have a corrugated rubber drain. You insert the drain and release all the pus out, so that the pus drains out of the spaces. And the necrotizing fasciitis is the terminal stage in which is indicative of a rapidly spreading infection, which says that uh, mm, the is the most terminal and advanced stage, the climax of the space infection. So it's a rapidly spreading infection. It can cause necrosis of the tissue, subcutaneous tissue, by thrombosis of the vessels, and then that supply the superficial muscle and skin. They may also affect the deep facial spaces. They result in aggressive spread through the spaces to deeper structures, and then it can cause up to descending necrotizing mediastinum. This is how it appears. This entire skin gets sloughed off, and then it reaches as below as the chest. So when this case condition, septicemia can very easily settle in, and then that it can prove fatal to the patient. It will be literally dying. So this is another case of necrotizing fasciitis that you can see. This eats up the entire skin. Okay, see, and then this is how the pus laden skin appears. Okay, so by thorough debridement, it can we can when it goes to that area, there's that is the scar formation after debridement. So you have this pathway of spread of infection. It can go up from the root apex, the pus can go on all the ways. It can go up, it can go to the sideways. Depending on it, you will have this. Either it can be very milder form of vestibular abscess, or it can go to the subsequent spaces. Just to know how all this infection can go into the lateral pharyngeal space, into the stergomandibular space, onto the mesenteric space from the third molar region. So we have to be very careful in case of assessing the spread of infection. These are the potential pathways of spread of infection. So it can from masticator space. When it reaches the masticator space, it can go to the lateral pharyngeal space or pharyngeal space, or it can ascend the danger space, and then it can cause mediastinitis. When the infection goes to the submandibular space, it can travel to the submental space, and then it can cross the midline, and it can travel the contralateral submandibular space, and then again that area of sublingual space, and which can cause Ludwig's angina and airway obstruction. When in case of cavernous sinus thrombosis, it can give rise to infraorbital space, and which can descend through the angular vein, causing the cavernous sinus thrombosis. These are all the worst case scenarios. These are all the worst case scenarios, which should not be underestimated. So you have these things in mind and treat the patient. Okay, never take chances in cases of space infection. So the other causes of the space infection, other than the odontogenic causes, may be salivary gland infection, trauma, upper respiratory tract infection, presence of a foreign body, or aggressive instrumentation, or spread of localized or superficial infection. Other things can also happen. So the diagnosis is by the symptoms, and associated with all the constitutional symptoms of pain, fever, and swelling. Patient will definitely have dysphagia, patient unable to swallow, and then the patient, when it's involving the muscles of mastication, the patient is having trismus, and then there will be associated respiratory for the mechanism I mentioned above. So physical examination, you will definitely expect a swelling, an elevated temperature. When you touch over the swelling, the skin over the temperature is warm. When the skin over the temperature is cold, then it is an abscess. When the skin over the temperature is warm, then there is some active infection, there is cellulitis and space infection. And then the patient will be dehydrated because of lack of fluid intake. And then you have dental abnormalities, you have oropharyngeal abnormalities, laryngeal abnormalities, and of course, it is oral tissue examination. You should be able to differentiate between a cellulitis and abscess by testing its fluctuancy. So it's soft to fluctuant or hard. When it is hard or indurated, then you know that it is an acute stage of infection. Okay, and then the color and temperature to determine the presence and extent of the infection you have to know. And then normal versus abnormal tissue architecture, by especially by when you should be able to identify the mucobuccal fold is obliterated or not, or the soft palate is symmetric or not, and the nasal tip, nasolabial fold is obliterated or not, and then circumorbital area there is a swelling or not. All these things you should be able to differentiate between, and how it appears normal, how it appears swollen. So identify the causative factors first. That is the causative factor. Root cause has to be identified, and because most of these space infections will resolve when the root cause is removed. So it may be a tooth or root tip or foreign body, and then the vital signs should be taken. Temperatures more than 101 to 102 Fahrenheit, accompanied by an tachycardia, that is elevated heart rate, indicates systemic involvement and indicates urgency of treatment. In these cases, you should be able to shift the patient to a hospital. So, in a nutshell, when a patient comes to you with an odontogenic space infection, as a general dental practitioner, you should be able to differentiate whether I am going to take up the case or refer the patient to the specialist. Okay, this is something very important. So you determine your skill, and then the moment you doubt about the progress of the disease within the confines of your management, then never hesitate to refer to a specialist, or never hesitate to admit the patient in the hospital and call for the specialist. Okay, this is the idea in maintaining. That could save you a lot of stress during your routine practice. Okay, fine. The radiographic examination, you have lateral and anterior posterior radiograph can be taken, AP views can be taken, and then they can show tracheal deviation or subcutaneous air or any foreign bodies in the radiograph, or fluid within the soft tissues. And then the radiograph is the chest. In case of any mediastinitis, it can show pulmonary edema, pneumothorax, or pneumomediastinum or hilar adenopathy. So CTs will tell you about the extent of spread of the infections, and MRI is not routinely indicated in these things. Only you are going to study the space. So CT findings will show the airway status, lymph node involvement, and extent of inflammation, and all these things you can see. And in management, as I've already told you, manage the adequate airway with humidified oxygen. You might need tracheostomy, cricothyroidectomy, or endotracheal intubation, and control the infection by hospitalizing and then repeated blood and pus cultures with fluid resuscitation. Okay, fine. And then your antibiotics should be specifically selected after obtaining series of pus cultures. And then the antibiotics that are usually used are I mean the microbial origin is you cannot pinpoint to one microbe, so all these things are more polymicrobial. Remember that as the infection progresses to space infection, the spectrum changes from gram positive aerobes to gram negative anaerobes. So your antibiotic choice of antibiotic therapy should involve both these antibiotics that can combat these organisms. So antibiotics should be prescribed for 1 week at least, and then which can achieve the tissue concentration in 24 to 48 hours, and then could have an extended bactericidal activity for the period of 3 to 5 days. Penicillin, clindamycin, and cephalosporins are the drug of our choice. And remember, the patient allergic to penicillin can be allergic to cephalosporin as well because of cross sensitivity. So exercise due caution. And then to combat the gram-negative organisms, anaerobic organisms, you can have the metronidazole as well. Now, always combine, in case of odontogenic infection, always combine the penicillin group of drugs with metronidazole. We have found good effect in this over our period of practice. So you have this erythromycin, metronidazole, and augmentin. Augmentin is much more effective with amoxicillin and clavulanic acid. They are very effective in treating the odontogenic infections. Okay, because they are able to kill the penicillinase producing bacteria that interface with amoxicillin. Okay, fine. And this medical therapy, hydration therapy, airway maintenance, all these things are supportive. Okay, uh, actual treatment is incision and drainage. So you have to that can remove the bacterial load. That can remove the bacterial, the toxins in the circumscribed area of the body. So you have to do the incision and drainage. It's used by Hilton's method of drainage. That is, you have to insert the Hilton's forceps inside after placing a stab incision. You have to insert, and then once you are inside the tissues, there you open up the beaks. This is to break the locules of pus so that they can coalesce, and then the entire pus can drain out. Okay, so you have to do that with Moshe's guidelines, and you have this very other. I will see. Yeah, this is the how you have to various landmarks of placement of incisions in the for incision and drainage. Mm, so always place the incisions along the crease of the muscles and then along the line, because your incision should not result in an ugly scar on the skin. So always along the crease of the muscles and creases of the skin, and in the most dependent part we have to place the incision so that the gravity can pull the can facilitate the abscess drainage through the tissues. So canine sublingual and vestibular abscesses are drained intraorally, whereas masseter, pterygomandibular, and lateral pharyngeal spaces can be done with both intraoral and extraoral drainage, and whereas temporal, submandibular, and submental regions, other spaces can be drained through extraoral incision only. So in case of using extraoral incision, you should be careful enough to avoid the important intervening anatomic structures. So what can happen if these things are not done? Carotid artery erosion can happen, and then you call something called as carotid blowout can happen, and then it can cause massive hemorrhage. Internal jugular thrombosis can happen, which can affect the brain, and then cavernous sinus thrombosis can happen, neurologic deficits can happen. I mean, osteomyelitis can happen when it eats up the entire bone of the mandible, and then osteomyelitis of the spine can happen when it goes to the prevertebral fascia, and then mediastinitis can happen, pulmonary edema can happen, aspiration due to spontaneous rupture of the pus can happen, and ultimately sepsis can happen. All these things can predispose to death. Okay, fine. So this is the supportive therapy in which when it's a Ryle's tube in which the patient is not able to take anything intraorally, they uh, insert the Ryle's tube and then they feed through the Ryle's tube. So with this, we come to the conclusion of this odontogenic space infection. The next part in this odontogenic space infection will be what happens when it eats up the bone. That will be the osteomyelitis of the mandible that will be discussed in the next chapter. And in examination point of view, you have to know the anatomical boundaries of various spaces. You have to know how the spaces spread from one region to another. In clinical point of view, you should be able to know whether you are able to predict the life-threatening situation, and at the most very importantly, whether I am going to treat or I am going to refer the patient to a specialist should be the uh, first in the algorithm. Okay, once you refer to the specialist, you are very free and you have done your job. If you want to intervene, you intervene, but exercise due caution with getting adequate support from your medical colleagues. Okay, thank you. Have a nice day.